Hello, and welcome again to Creative Connections. I'm your host, Gary Blanchard, and today I am very happy to have back as my guest poet, writer, and editor Carol Mays. Carol, welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
So, since you were here last, you've been working on a couple of very new projects.
That's correct.
So, one has to do with poetry. What are you doing with that now?
Well, they both have something to do with poetry.
Both have something to do with poetry.
Yeah, I decided to take a more direct approach in trying to interest people in poetry, because I've run into a lot of indifference in the public in general when I talk about poetry, and I thought, these folks don't know what they're missing, and I guess I'm going to rather than showing them beautiful poems, I'm going to have to tell them directly why poetry is so wonderful. So I've started teaching poetry appreciation classes.
That's great. So what are these classes about?
Well, it talks about mainly the psychological benefits of reading poetry. I've done one class so far at the Ware Senior Center, and I'm hoping to do one class every month somewhere. Okay. I have to start lining up a schedule for the spring. But I can review some of the points of the class.
Okay, yeah. It would be interesting, to let people know what the benefits are.
Well, the class is an hour long, and I give examples of each of the points that I make, which I don't have time to do tonight. But for example, there's so much beauty in poetry, at least in my estimation, in good poetry.
Okay.
And the beauty can come through the images, or it can come through certain techniques in writing a poem, using techniques that they teach you in high school that probably bores everybody, but things like alliteration, meter, which is the rhythm of the poem, rhyme. Sometimes I don't use a whole lot of rhymes in my own poems, but these techniques add to the beauty of the subject matter in the poem. And I guess I don't need to be an advocate for beauty. I hope it's universally recognized that beauty has some value. It's just, this is an example of that. But for me, the primary benefit of poetry is it brings you to another place, because we tend to get bogged down in all the minutiae that goes on in our daily lives, and poetry can lift you above that. It can show you a broader dimension to things, a deeper dimension to things. It can even, through poems like Edgar Allan Poe's, bring you to a whole different surreal kind of world, and it just takes you away, and it broadens your horizons on life in general. Another benefit is poetry can be healing. If you're enmeshed in problems or issues, it can either restore your sense of normalcy by addressing those issues, or it can just, as I say, offer you an escape for a while, so then you can come back and see things in a fresh perspective.
Right. Speaking of the healing qualities of poetry, for a while you were providing little books of poems and tiny vases of flowers to patients at Mary Lane Hospital.
Right, that was a project I did for a couple of years. I would grow, actually, the flowers, some of them I grew, but many of them were wild herbs and flowers that I put into little miniature bouquets, and I had little poetry booklets made up, and I would bring them in, and the nurses would distribute them to the inpatients there at Mary Lane.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of a poem that you feel might be healing? Or am I putting you on the spot?
Well, no, there's plenty of them. We talked about this book last time, Uplifting Poems.
Okay.
And it has many beautiful poems in it. I can read one. Well, this one is just so gorgeous. I have to make sure I read it.
Okay.
Just for the beauty of it. This is from Pandora's Songs. It's a much longer poem, but this is just a short selection by Trumbull Stickney. And this particular stanza goes, As an immortal nightingale, I sing behind the summer sky, through leaves of starlight, gold and pale, that shiver with my melody, along the wake of the full moon, far on to oceans and beyond, where the horizons vanish down in darkness clear as diamond. I mean, you just can't get any better than that, you know?
That really is beautiful.
But one that might be healing, in particular, I love this one, The Flight of the Gulls.
Okay.
William Wilfred Campbell, one of my favorite poets. He was from Canada. He lived about 100 years ago. And it goes like this. Out over the spaces, the sunny blue places of water and sky, where day on day merges in nights that reel by, through calms and through surges, through storming and lulls, oh, follow, follow the flight of the gulls. With wheeling and reeling, with skimming and stealing, we wing with the wind out over the heaving of gray waters, leaving the lands far behind and dipping ships' hulls. Oh, follow, follow the flight of the gulls. Up over the thunder of reefs that lie under and dead sailors' graves, like snowflakes in summer, like blossoms in winter, we float on the waves and the shore tide that pulls. Oh, follow, follow the flight of the gulls. Would you know the wild vastness of their lakes and their fastness, their heaven's blue span? Then come to this region from the dwellings of man. Leave the life care behind you that nature annuls, and follow, follow the flight of the gulls. Again, that just takes you right there.
It really is a beautiful poem.
Yeah.
Why do you think poetry is so underappreciated?
You know, I've been trying to find an answer for that, and I don't know, people tell me they don't understand it. I don't understand it, really. I mean, maybe they had bad experiences in high school with poetry. They may have read a lot of bad poems. You know, many modern poems are just a way for people to vent their nasty feelings, and they you know, it's like a catharsis for them. It might help them, but I don't see where it helps other people unless somehow that the reader has that same very problem, and maybe
right. They might identify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you know, not that I'm really conservative in terms of language, but when you just write a poem to see how many cuss words you can fit into it, it just kind of detracts from the.
Yeah, I've been to some of those poetry readings.
Yeah, some of them we can't even discuss on the air. It's so bad.
Yes, yes, I remember that one. So. When you bring this class to a place, basically you do all the prep work, and does it cost anything for you to bring this program to an organization?
No, that would be an interesting experiment to see if I charged, if more people would come. But no, I don't charge anything. In fact, I give away copies of this book, the Uplifting Poems, to everybody who shows up. You really have to make it sweet, or people don't even pay any attention to what's being offered, you know.
Right.
So
if a senior center or a church group wanted to have one of these poetry classes, you would do it, and you would not charge them to do it.
Right.
So
Right.
that sounds like a wonderful deal to me, and you know, I really suggest that you check into that and see what can be done, because this is, you know, a wonderful program, and I think that bringing the love of poetry into people's lives has got to be a very worthwhile thing to do.
Every once in a while, someone will say, you know, I hadn't really paid much attention to poetry since, you know, I was back in high school, but you've really opened a door for me. Well, every once in a while, somebody will say that, and I'll say, oh, yeah, yes, you know, it's worth doing. So,
yeah. Well, you know, and I think that, you know, for you, I think poetry isn't something that you are trying to make a vocation out of. It's almost a calling.
Well, you know, I've tried to in many ways to try to bring an ennobled perspective to society and to life. And right now, this is the way I'm trying to do it. Because that was another point I was going to make about the benefit of poetry. Is it's very ennobling. You know, to me, good poetry is. And it helps you relate to other circumstances, other people in other times, other places. And you know, by extension, then with the human race as a whole, it helps lift you above your own personal concerns.
Right. You know, and with that poem by William Wilford Campbell, for instance, even though it's, what, 100 years old?
Yeah.
It really speaks to us still. You know, and it's one of those cases, there are some older poems where the language is very stilted, where language usage has changed. But there's an example of a poem that 100 years later speaks just as clearly as it did when it was written.
Right, right.
How do you find all these poems that you include in the books?
Well, you know, I've been reading poetry for so long that I have a lot that I know about already. But for someone who hasn't read poetry lately, you can just Google just about anything these days. You can put in, if you know of a poet or a poem, you can just Google it and find it immediately. Or you can go into certain websites. You can Google poetry websites, and it'll bring up, you know, 5 or 6 different websites that you can go on. You can find innumerable poems. And if you find one poem that you like, or one poet that you like, then keep searching and you'll find more poems by that particular poet or more poems on that subject. Or, you know, it's very easy to find. And on YouTube, you can find all kinds of wonderful videos of poets reading their poems or multimedia presentations of someone else's poem. I mean, it's just there. All you have to do is click.
Right. And I will have to say that you have a series of poems on YouTube under the name Idyllic Productions, if people do.
Well, if people go into my website, and I have to look it. I always have to look it up. www.idyllicproductions.org. There's a link there that will take you into YouTube, into my, what is it called, a channel?
YouTube channel.
Into my YouTube channel. You can find it through that link.
And I think Flight of the Gulls is one of the poems that you did, and it's got beautiful images and music and sound effects, and they're just so beautiful, so inspiring, and so uplifting and relaxing.
Oh, thank you.
So, you know, they're certainly worth looking up. Another project that you started since you were here last is a new book.
Right.
So tell me about the book.
This just came out of nowhere. It was nothing I had planned to do. The last time you and I went away, did you mention to people I'm your wife, by the way?
Yeah, that was covered on the first time you were here, but Carol Mays is indeed my wife. So when she says that we went away somewhere, it's all above board.
Not that it matters anymore, right? Yeah, we went to Jamestown, Rhode Island. And I was so moved by the beauty of the place, and I hadn't been near the shore in quite a while, and it just moved me so much. I said, you know, I want to write a book that brings this wonder and this beauty and this sea-related imagery to people. So I actually wrote this in about 4 months, and I'm just about to publish it. It's called The Mystique of the Sea: Poems, Stories, and Intriguing Facts. So it's hardly any of my own work in here, other than all my work putting it together.
Right, right.
I think I just have one of my own poems in here, but there's a lot of classic poetry by Poe, Emily Dickinson, many other classical writers. And then there's stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, little known stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, a Russian, a classic Russian storyteller, Mikhail Lermontov, and there's poems also by John Masefield. Tons of literature from a wide variety of sources in here. And then the facts, that was quite an adventure for me because I spent a lot of time going through websites, magazines, online and offline, books, television broadcasts, finding any kind of interesting fact I could find about the oceans. So I ended up with about 60 pages of facts, or summaries of facts, very interesting stuff that I had no idea. So I'm hoping between the poems and the stories and these facts that it will ignite some re-interest. If people haven't already been interested in the sea, at least it will ignite some of that.
Yeah. Why do you think the sea has that mystique?
It's something different. unless your occupation is to be a fisherman or something, it's something different. For some people, it represents like a dream of escape or an opportunity to escape.
Okay.
It's just a romantic, far-off vision, unless you actually get out there and make a living, in which case it's not all that glorious. I left out in this, there were a lot of, when I was looking for classic stories, because I had to use works in the public domain, so nobody would sue me for reprinting their story or their poem. But many of the stories related to the sea are just full of horror and violence and nastiness. I mean, really vile stuff, really awful. It was really hard for me to find stories that had that sense of romance and wonder. I finally did, but it was tough going for a while.
But the poems, I believe you say in the introduction, the poems are much more capture that mystique.
Right, the poems I found much gentler for the most part. I mean, there's some horrific poems as well.
Right.
I mean, poems about the horror of the sea, but most of them are much more gentle.
Yeah. As I recall, and I think you do have a fact in there that the sea is sort of the frontier that we have not fully explored. And I believe I've heard that we probably know more about the solar system than we know about the oceans.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of photographing or scanning what's down there, the resolution, I believe, with what we know about the sea is 3 miles. It's like we know about the whole ocean, all the oceans have been scanned to a resolution of about 3 miles. So anything bigger than 3 miles would show up on a scan. But we know more about the surface of Mars and Venus than we do about the ocean floor.
Wow. Okay. So would you like to give an example of a poem to see that?
Sure. Well, this is called Exiled by Edna St. Vincent Millay. Searching my heart for its true sorrow, this is the thing I find to be, that I am weary of words and people, sick of the city, wanting the sea, wanting the sticky, salty sweetness of the strong wind and shattered spray, wanting the loud sound and the soft sound of the big surf that breaks all day. Always before about my dooryard, marking the reach of the winter sea, rooted in sand and dragging driftwood, straggled the purple wild sweet pea. Always I climbed the wave at morning, shook the sand from my shoes at night. that now am caught beneath great buildings, stricken with noise, confused with light. If I could hear the green piles groaning under the windy wooden piers, see once again the bobbing barrels and the black sticks that fence the weirs, if I could see the weedy mussels crusting the wrecked and rotting hulls, hear once again the hungry crying overhead of the wheeling gulls, feel once again the shanties straining under the turning of the tide, fear once again the rising freshet, dread the bell in the fog outside, I should be happy, that was happy all day long on the coast of Maine. I have a need to hold and handle shells and anchors and ships again. I should be happy, that am happy never at all since I came here. I am too long away from water. I have a need of water near.
Beautiful.
And here's a short one, Emily Dickinson. Exultation is the going.
Okay.
Exultation is the going of an inland soul to sea, past the houses, past the headlands, into deep eternity. Bred as we among the mountains, can the sailor understand the divine intoxication of the first league out from land?
Wow.
Of course, she's also talking about more than the ocean.
Sure,
but
sure.
It works on
the ocean is metaphor,
both
but
levels,
absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, it always amazes me as you stand at the edge of the ocean and you look out, and even knowing what we know now about where there's eventually land out there, you think back hundreds and thousands of years when people set out not knowing what was out there.
Yeah.
And just to stand and you look in the horizon and you see nothing but water, it just amazes me that people had the fortitude and the bravery to set out. And, you can see where it would be this sense of freedom and escape. So.
And, way back when, people were afraid that they would fall off the edge of the world. If they sailed too far out, they would fall into this great abyss. If they'd go off the edge of the ocean and fall into this great abyss. And also that they would get fatally close to the sun by sailing out too far.
Okay.
And even, I think it was in the 19th century, people still believed that ships and drowned people never hit the ocean floor, that they would just kind of move around and float forever, like in the sea somewhere, but never actually fall to the bottom of the ocean. That's in the facts. Can I tell you about the different categories?
I was going to ask you about those. So,
well, there's a section on physical features. There's one on sea creatures, on explorations, on legends. Here's a fun fact.
Okay.
The immortal, quote unquote, immortal jellyfish, and I have the Latin name, but I don't know how to pronounce it, can revert back to its juvenile state without dying, thereby starting its life all over again. And it does this without a brain. And then I put humans who have brains cannot figure out how the creature accomplishes this. But yeah, I mean, it never dies because when it gets old, it just reverts back to its juvenile state. It's
really an amazing thing to ponder. What's another interesting?
Well, there's a jellyfish that lives primarily in the Arctic waters. It's 120 feet long. 120 feet long. Can you imagine?
And in your reading, you learned a little bit about mermaids as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of eyewitness accounts of mermaids. Not that I believe them, but yeah. I mean, pretty detailed accounts seen by numerous people and seen by government officials, not just derelicts.
not just people who have been out to sea so long that they're little drunk on rum.
Yeah, right.
this book, you are now in the proofing process,
I am.
and it should probably be available on Amazon soon.
I'm hoping in a week or two it should be available.
So,
This is the
yeah.
latest proof, and they have this band right across the top, which totally ruins the picture. But hopefully they'll take that out when it's
Oh,
no
they will
longer
definitely take that out when they, but,
when it's no longer a proof.
yeah. So is there a question that I didn't ask that you wish I would have asked you?
Well, I could talk forever about these facts.
Okay, well, we've got about another minute. So.
Okay. Well, and by the way, people should know, I mean, they can find this book, or at least they will be able to in a couple of weeks. They can find this book on Amazon. They can find my DVD, which is basically has the same poems and multimedia presentations that are on YouTube. These are all available on Amazon.
Okay.
So, let's see. The weedy sea dragon, the male and the female, they do this beautiful courtship dance where they mirror each other's movements, and they glide through the water. They're beautiful creatures. If you don't know what they are, look them up. Because they look like they have little branches on their bodies. They're animals, of course, but they look like plants, and they mimic each other's swaying motion for hours in the water. It's just gorgeous, and you can even see that video on YouTube. Just go into YouTube and then search for the weedy sea dragon dancing through the night, and it should come up.
Okay. Well, Carol, thank you so much for coming back in
You're welcome.
Sharing your enthusiasm for poetry and the sea. And I want to thank you for joining us for Creative Connections, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
All right.